Observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight. Good evening. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us as we discuss important issues. And you might be the very one out there that can connect that last dot that gives us the fullest picture. So please feel free to throw your comments in the live chat as we're going through. We're going to try to respond to some of the comments. Also, you'll be able to interact with those watching us on Rumble, on the Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, YouTube channel, Twitter, and quite a few others with the Adapt 2030 and Mountain High Time 420 stamps on those. We're coming into a time now of extreme cold is following. Major cold trend set to unleash frost freeze threat across the U.S. So, well, thanks for telling me. Yeah, sometimes if I get a update, sometimes they do the update, like when they reset everything for you, and then it pulls me off and takes me on to the system microphone.
Ransom, how's that sound? A little better? Give it a thumbs up. Yeah. So this major cold freeze coming in, it is going to be an anomalous blip. So if you're going to plant your gardens and you're putting out your winter garden or fall garden, you might want to hold off a week or so until this frost freeze being unleashed across the U.S. is over with. Because if you're going to put out supple lettuces right now, it's going to get below freezing. It's going to get down like 30 degrees here this week.
Yes.
Some places like 28 Fahrenheit. If you're up in like West Virginia, north of that, it's going to be below 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Like the different kales and spinaches and lettuces, these like cool weather, but they don't like completely frozen. You're going to have to use row crop on top of your crops if they're already out. They walk until they're blue in the face about the heat. Super El Nino in the summer. It was one, bevy of news articles for a full month, the hottest month in July. But here we are, not even at the end of September, just barely creeping into October, and we're going to be at 28, 27 degrees Fahrenheit in the evenings. That's a crop killer, and whatever was maturing in the fields and everybody's gardens are gone, unless you cover them or it's the very hardiest of crops like turnips or potatoes or sweet potatoes or something. The leaves will die off above the surface, but then those potatoes are safe underground. Whatever tuber you're growing is safe underground. But still, these are the things to think about moving forward here. Yeah, there's the politics happening. And I think, I'm going to ask Ransom to respond to this because I think that there's this massive amount of energy coming through our solar system at this moment. At the same time, we're getting these massive distractions. From the Trump, unwinding of companies to the government shutdown to the impeachment hearings, all happening right this second as we'd enter into the deepest of the quake window. Begins on the 29th. And hopefully, Ransom, I sent you some slides. You can put those up into the viewer of looking geocentrically, like from our Earth, where is the sun and where are those gas giants? And we're sitting right in the middle of this pincer point. So that's what I'm saying. We're going to talk about tonight. The quake window is now open from the 29th of September through the 16th of October. So if we see any large earthquakes or volcanic eruptions outside the norms, that's because of the electromagnetism that's now turned on in our solar system, which will be at maximum intensity October of 2024, actually October 23rd. 2024. So Ransom, I know I babble sometimes when we start the show. Thank you, everybody joining Bigfoot for President 2024. Ransom, the floor is yours, man.
I would totally vote for Bigfoot for president. Is that a serious thing? No, I'm kidding. No, I put that up there And somewhere in my list of articles, I was just reading about scientists being worried in an uptick in volcanic activity and seismic activity around Mount Vesuvius. And, we've been seeing eruptions all over the place. So earthquakes, volcanoes, it's so funny to me because I know as a citizen of the world that it's my fault because of my carbon footprint if a volcano, decides to spew more carbon dioxide than all of mankind in one burp, because that's happened before. Just kidding. I don't really feel bad. No, I hope that when we send the notes out, I put a mathematical formula in there. I'm going to put it in the chat. I was talking about it last week. That has to do with the number of trees per country versus the CO2 emissions estimate. I want to make that clear that they don't know how much anybody actually emits. They have estimates. So that's one of those words like might, maybe, but we know the science could be, in that realm. However, there is a simple math formula that I came across that has to do with the amount of sequestering, if I could say that way, sequestering CO2 per tree per year, per tree's lifetime, etc. So I looked into that and I started doing some basic math, and let me find it. And it will blow you away because it just puts the propaganda of CO2 just kind of in an anecdotal, comedic point in relevance. Okay, so here it is. I found it. How much carbon is sequestered by a tree? A single mature tree will sequester about 48 pounds. That's 0.006 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, and store about 100 pounds. That's 0.045 metric tons over its lifetime. Now, it took me a while to compile the number of trees in North America because they break them down by countries. But I eventually did it, and I came to about around 675 billion trees in North America. So this means that these trees will sequester about 4.5 billion metric tons each year. And this is not counting any other plants. So keep that in mind. This isn't counting grass or vines or, anything else. No other kind of plant form or other forms of carbon dioxide sequestering. So that doesn't include that. So like I said, there's 675 billion trees in North America, and they sequester about 4.5 billion metric tons each year of carbon dioxide. Now, according to the global warming nuts and the climate hysteria people, the weirdos, basically, because when look, and I'm not even that smart, and I'm not even that good at math, but this was a simple formula. So the U.S. by itself is supposed to put out a certain amount. So I added up Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and even with their estimate, we put out 4.8 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide each year. So I don't know if you noticed the parallel there, but the trees are sucking in the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide each year. And then on top of that, like I said, that's not even counting any of the other forms of carbon dioxide sequestering. And then, I'm sitting here looking at these graphs that go back in the climatological history of Earth. And I see that we're like almost the coldest and the least amount of carbon dioxide ever on this planet. So that means all the other times that your fantasy takes you to with dinosaurs and giant forests and big bugs and all of these other things, all of that happened when there was, I don't know how many times more, like a bunch of, I forgot the number. I think it's about 10 times
7,000 parts per million. I got your answer. 7,000 parts per million. Today we said around 400.
Right. So think about the difference there. So that 7,000 parts per million represents exploding diverse life on Earth with lots of plants, all kinds of species we'll never see again. And then they're comparing that to now, where they're trying to convince you that the planet is now burning up and you're going to die because you eat meat, because the cows fart. They don't, and this is funny for all you people out there that are familiar with North American history. There were billions of bison running the North American plains. They were pooping everywhere. They were farting. They were eating up grass. So they were even eating all the extra grass that would be sequestering that carbon dioxide. They were eating it up. You fast forward to today, and they're trying to convince you that the cows that we eat are producing so much gases that we're all going to die because we eat that meat. So this is the nonsensical, tyrannical 1984 misinformation. That's what it is. And that's why they're so hard on about distracting and misinforming you and telling you that everybody's misinforming you. It's because they're doing it. It's a big projection from the elite about misinformation.
Bigfoot for president 2024. You heard it here first. But I'd like to respond to a couple of those comments with a few programs that are ongoing right now. And just so everybody can get an idea, currently in the world, there are about 1 billion cows totally across the whole planet. And then if you look in, there's approximately 700 million chickens across the planet. You know, pigs, I would have to get you a number, but I would imagine it's somewhere around 300 million pigs. So the amount of cows is actually equivalent or even less than when they were wildly running in these packs. You know, they talked about that some of these herds across the Midwestern plains in total would be like 100 million bison moving during a season between what we know now as just a few states. Can you imagine that? That, you know, you saw the same thing, and probably, you know, you ever watch those adventure movies from the 1930s? YouTube has a huge collection of like 1930s Africa safari, like real documentaries. The amount of animals is staggering, how many there are, like millions of zebras moving across the plains, like millions. And wildebeest also, millions of wildebeest. Nothing like that today. There's hardly anything left when you see these images, you know. So taking into consideration the wildlife, real in the wilds wildlife, with the amount of bodies that was. And those have all been reduced already from overpopulation, illegal hunting, whatever, just land encroachment, building cities where, you know, zebras or, you know, something would roam, lions, doesn't matter, elephant, everything you see, the jaguars, everything you look at, the habitat's shrinking. Now they're just in parks across South Africa and Zimbabwe, Botswana and Namibia. Like those giant animals, they're relegated to just parks where nobody can really poach them, and just their internet. The amount of wild animals is just staggering how many have been lost just since the 1930s. Yeah, that's been 100 years. But to then blame a billion cows, which is kind of the equilibrium point of the amount of either bison, cattle, buffalo, or whatever it is across the planet remains pretty much the same. Yet all those external wild animals have completely disappeared. So you'd think there have to be some offset from that, right? And then also, if I could say one thing about the carbon sequestration credits. You know, to your point, each tree can be measured on how much carbon it sequesters through a year. Now, you can do an average. Now, each tree species is going to be slightly different. So what they were, at least the way I was understanding it, is if you pledged your land to the carbon offset credit system, you had to be 200 acres minimum, and you had to pledge that you wouldn't log it for 20 years. I mean, you occasionally have something to fall down, that's okay, because that's natural fall, but you wouldn't go in and cut it. And what they would do is they would run some satellites over and use LiDAR to measure the average tree species density per acre, and then come out with that magic number. So if an ash tree has this much, or a gum tree has this much, or an oak tree has this much, or a walnut tree, or a hazelnut, or maple leaf, whatever it is. We'll measure that and give an average over that. Okay, it's 25% maple, 25% ash, 25% pine, and then, you know, whatever else it is. And then there's some grassland there with a bunch of elderberry bushes. And they'll average all that out into how much carbon sequestered per acre. And then they pay that back to, you know, then you can put that on the carbon market. So let's say it is like, you know, 5 tons per year per acre. You know, the average prices that they're looking for is going to be somewhere around $200 US equivalent of now, not hyper, but of per ton. So they were looking for some equilibrium at $200 US per ton. So you have to think about it. If you're getting 5, that's $1,000 per year per acre, and you're holding 200 acres, just you're never going to develop it, and you're getting $200,000 a year just to have that land. You know, only people with a lot of money already have 200, 500, 10,000 acres. That's not, you know, me or my neighbors. No, we got 20 acres out here, 30, 50. Some of the old timers here, the old family lands, you know, 100, 200 acres, 150. But, you know, getting up to 200 acres, Amish have 500. You know, and they bought that way back in the 1980s. So to get these large tracts of land, either your old money, and when I say that, I mean old families from the original settlers from wherever you were. So down here in East Tennessee, it was, you know, in the early 1800s, and there's no land patents here in Tennessee either, if anybody's wondering. That's not a thing here. It is out in Texas and other places you can chase that down, but here it's a no-go. You know, I think 200 years ago, families in here getting 2,000 acres for like $1 an acre, something like that. So think about the big mo. What if you had 1,000 acres and you're getting $1,000 per year per acre just to leave it alone, not develop it, and leave it as a forest? That's $1 million a year. Can you imagine that? Every single year for the next 20 years, as long as you have the land to pledge. So it's just it's a way just to launder money, in my opinion. You can't put that value on the forest. And Bill Gates wants to cut down 70 million acres and bury them underground, because his whole philosophy is those forests grew up, they sequestered all that CO2 in their tree trunks, and all that carbon's captured in the branches and the leaves and the trunk and the roots. But if that collapses and those trees fall down and they die, and then they just naturally rot in the forest, all that carbon's re-released back in the atmosphere. So they wanted to cut 70 million acres of trees and bury all the logs underground to stop the CO2 coming off those logs as they decompose in the forest. Can you believe that? What kind of insanity is that? And Ransom, you were just talking to the opposite. I swear we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, because I know I did this for Mike Adams when we had our interview on Friday a couple of weeks back. This, you know, wood sequestration or underground wood storage is kind of crazy stuff too, right along with the carbon credits for the forest that don't do anything except rich people keeping their land, pledging it to the system. It's almost like the good old boys, scratch your back, I'll scratch mine. You know, hey, we'll keep this off. We won't develop. We can play the game. But your minimum input is 200 acres. So good luck finding that if anybody out there has it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to have much acres for very long. It seems like, you know, all the news is nobody can afford to buy new land as it is right now, or at least a lot of Americans can't do that. And they keep pushing this idea along with these other crazy ideas, like you were talking about burying. Why wouldn't they use the wood? Isn't it sequestered if it's used? To bury it. And then think about all of the equipment it takes to knock down all the trees and then, you know, bury them in a big old empty field. When they know.
Oh, wait. Then you have to use a polymer liner, which is produced in a factory, to line the pits so none of the CO2 can escape through the ground.
I know.
Yeah, right. That's a scam. That's what I'm saying. It's such the biggest scam.
It would make more sense to just let the tree grow its lifetime and sequester that amount of CO2 if that's actually what they were going to do. But that's not what they're really wanting to do. And actually now, you know, we're talking about a lot of distractions, but it's really weird that they kind of tell the truth in a real way. You just have to pay attention to what they're pushing and how often they push it and how many articles are kind of connected. So this is one right here. Can't afford California? Try living in a tiny sleeping pod all 4 feet of it, more tiny homes. And as you know, a lot of places that were burnt by wildfires got rezoned to where they can, have, instead of single family homes, now they can have tiny homes. But it seems like all aspects of economies in the Western Hemisphere are moving towards a lower population. Now, I don't know if you saw the conspiracy theory on the internet about a Deagle.com article. I sent you a screenshot of the article before they took it down off the internet. But in it, it was talking about the year 2025 and the amount of population reduction by country. Now, I don't know if they were just yanking people's chains. They did it intentionally to start a conspiracy theory, or it's just one of those boo-boos, like they weren't ready to put out that kind of information in article form. However, it got on the internet. It did long enough for people to see it. And, in there, it was talking about countries like the UK and the United States getting their populations reduced by about 20%.
And Ransom, also, may I ask, the GDP also, did you notice this, the down shrinking of the GDP reflected the down shrinking of population?
Yeah. So that's exactly where I was going to go. What they're talking about is closing down human behavior and business and all aspects that go along with having a thriving populace in a civilization with money that is valuable. So simultaneously, the money is being devalued beyond belief. They're pushing these ideas of basically little villages outside of their mega cities. I mean, if you're going to live somewhere, you can't just have a bunch of land where you farm and grow stuff. And that's why they're attacking all of these different things at the same time. And then when you go through the headlines, you just see, and here's a picture of that for everybody. This is what they're talking about. And they've already opened up homeless shelters and different things like that. And if you don't think that a civilization can convert over to this style of living, you're wrong. Take a look at Japan. They literally have places like this where you can rent for the night. They even have some really cool ones that are revolving pods. But all of this involves you having a universal basic income or some kind of employment to pay for these per night, because this is the ultimate in metered systems. You get a 4x4 little spot. They've tried this in different places. It never works. There's no privacy. It reduces down to, bad things happening in the night. You need your privacy. That's why we have private property, and that's why we were always set up where people could own property and have privacy and have their person, papers, and their belongings secure within them, protected by an inalienable right that their government wouldn't come and just rifle through it. Or go through it or know what's happening or steal from them or anything else. But just like other amendments to our Constitution, I would argue that the Third Amendment, which says that no soldier could be quartered in our homes, is also being violated through internet spying. If someone's in your home listening to your conversation around the dinner table, if there's mics and cameras all throughout your living area and space that can be accessed by third parties and the companies that created the devices themselves, and then they share that information, and roundaboutly, legally, the government builds these metadata profiles and personality profiles, just like a profiler does. And then they're talking about why don't we build new cities? Well, because we're trying to reduce the amount of cities and areas that people could live in families in the Western Hemisphere. If you want to look to where they're building new cities, it's not here. It's in the Yucatan. They're building high-speed rails. They're cutting the jungle up, making new neighborhoods and areas and they say they're doing it for the local Mayan people. Although I have my doubts about that, because they're designing them in the same way that was planned for Lahaina in Hawaii, which are these smart cities that are completely closed off, 15-minute cities. Everything that you need or want would be in there. And then, if anything, God forbid, should happen, the authorities may tell you to just stay put, shelter in place. That doesn't work out. But then on with my point here. Homes unaffordable in 99% of the nation for average Americans. Biden to offer smallest ever offshore oil rights. In other words, they spout a lot of green energy stuff, but as far as it goes for the industrial complex, they're going to keep on burning that fossil fuel. People are taking their kids out of school because there's no faith left in the educational system. Dad's homeschooling children skyrockets in the last couple of years. People are taking that, and that I think is a really good headline, unlike some of the other ones we see. Southern California city becomes the first in the nation to recognize legal rights of non-human animals. Now that sounds great, and it really does.
That sounds like a chimera.
It really, well, you know, you can go there too, but that's not even where I was going to go. That's funny. You went there. Recognize the legal rights of non-human animals. Now, you could say that means all kinds of stuff, like you said, a chimera or whatever. But I was thinking more along the lines of the ending of people being able to eat meat. And when this becomes more of a popular thing and they start spreading this and recognizing the legal rights of non-human animals, which I do think that there is some degree of rights that animals should have, not to be treated cruelly or misused, but there, you know as well as I do, there's groups all over the world that want us to stop eating meat. They want us to eat the bugs, and they're going to introduce these ideas into the ether of civilization to try to guilt you all the way down to not eating meat or not using animal products because they will say it's slavery or this or that because of the legal rights. So although this sounds great, you know, in the idea of, you know, treating animals right, I guarantee you that that's where this is going to go in the future, is where they're mandating different rules on foods that you can eat based on the animal. Because, you know, how far do we go down the line? And like I said, I do agree in basic rights of non-cruelty to animals, to only use them according to the way that we should. There's even several religions that talk about this, how you shouldn't, treat your animals inhumanely. It's the food that you eat. You need to treat it good. You need to give it love. You need to let it have a happy life until it's time to eat it. And everybody remembers the vegan not too long ago that died, and she looked really healthy. And she ate a lot of healthy stuff. I even looked into her little story there. And I mean, she ate some really good superfoods, all kinds of good vegetables, lentils, beans, all kinds of stuff. But guess what? You will die of starvation if you don't have animal fats and proteins, period. That's like the more that they try to push this idea, the more people are going to die and be sick of malnutrition. Because we need that. So that's where I think it's going to go. And to swing it all back around, I think the world's about to have a series of major disasters. Not like that's a new thing for humans, but what's new about it is the elite and these groups trying to put every natural disaster, like I said before, it must be my carbon footprint that is raising the fears of a rise of volcanic eruption near Naples after they had their strongest earthquake in 40 years. Evacuation plans are being drafted after activity on Campi Flegrei, I can't say it, which experts warned earlier in 2023 was in a dangerous state because they think there may be a major volcanic eruption there. And here's an article from the Daily Mail. Is Seattle set for a megaquake? Scientists find two fault lines that are capable of releasing 7.8 magnitude earthquakes that could kill an estimated 1,600 people and destroy over 10,000 buildings. Now, we all know about the areas that go up and down the West Coast. And for some reason, I've always had an instinctual feeling. I've even had dreams about this, about that area. Is that I think it's the Cascadian subduction zone, I believe. That's right off the coast of Seattle and Portland. That would be the major knockout punch to the West Coast. I know everybody thinks it's probably going to be on the San Andreas, which is still possible, or even around San Francisco, which is very possible too. But those are mainly earthquakes that knock stuff down, and you get liquefaction in the southern areas of California. But up in the top, in the Cascadian subduction zone, is where I think the biggest threat is, because it would wipe out the entire West Coast. It possibly even Hawaii, Japan, other places would get massive tsunamis. If some kind of major event happened there. And, you know, that's my little attempt to kind of connect it to what you were talking about, and I'll put that picture back up of the planets charging up their magnetic fields. And what date is this here? Is this for today?
That was from yesterday and the day before. The actual field, so that 27 is the 27th of 09 is September. So it's 27 September 2023. Now the field, like those planets looking blue or with the purple around them, when that glows, those fields are interconnecting. But I like to use this map here because it gives you that geocentric view, like from the Earth, where's the sun and where are the planets? Like September 9th, 10th through the 12th was actually where the beginning of the Earth moving through the center of that field is. Now this is going to square up into a perfect square coming up in about a year and a month from now. But I would expect, because we're moving through the center of this magnetic field that's restructuring itself, a huge amount of things are going to start to happen in these two weeks here, just from where we roll through it. So this will give us a good indication on the intensity of the building field. Right now, we are at I'm going to just say a smidgen of the actual intensity, so we can get a real good gauge. Well, what types of earthquakes, what type of volcanic eruptions, where were they? Because if they're centered in one place, when the Earth swings around next year, it's probably going to be centered in the same places again. So you can sort of get the forecast out about a year, because it's generally going to be the same place. Because if you're going to come through the same magnetic field, but just amplified, those same energies are going to run through the same Paleozoic currents in the rocks, and it's going to follow the same crustal electrification patterns or crossover ley lines or wherever it's going to enter the atmosphere in the same areas, magnetic field. But there's going to be a lot of things. What if some dams crack as well? These kind of things. Because that Deagle website that you referenced, I don't know if anybody I had seen that back in like 2015 when I started my Adapt 2030 channel. That Deagle.com website's been around for a long time, since at least 2015, and suddenly they just take it offline in the last 6 months. Now, why is that? It was up live for more than 5 years. And now there's people that are, really taking that information, dissecting it, and showing you where they're breaking it down by the countries out of the entire 207 countries in the world based on that Deagle 25 forecast. Like they're breaking it down into the countries that are going to increase in population, the country's forecast increase in GDP, but then they have it broken down into neutral, where it's almost going to be no movement, where it's going to be like at a zero state, where there'll be no population growth or decline and no increase in GDP or decline in GDP. But then they have the whole rest of those all Western homogeny, Western hemisphere countries. I mean, unbelievable, massive declines. So I'm just wondering, like, do they already identify these areas with the volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, knowing that during this cycle, something is going to be rifted where if all the bridges across the Mississippi River were to go down in another New Madrid style earthquake, that would explain a lot of the decline in the American destruction and, shrinkage of the GDP. That's a massive GDP shrink from 4.8 trillion to 8.8 or 888 billion. I mean, you're going from 48 trillion to under 1 trillion. That's like a 50 times decline. That's insane. Like when you look at this thing, unless I'm reading that chart wrong and it's 4.8 trillion, but I think it would be closer to 48, the amount of money moving through the stock market, all the, automakers, although they're not, they're going on strike and whatnot, but just all the industry and, transportation and goods and services and things exchanged in the U.S. for a whole year. Yeah, 48 trillion could definitely be that. But that's crazy. Something dropped in 50x. But then you look at other places that are increasing. They all seem to be, I've read that, they seem to be like a modest increase. But the declines are the ones that seem the most staggering. And I do have, a thought on I traveled in Japan, and the Beehive Hotel is kind of what you referenced there. It's a novelty for Westerners to go stay in it. They're never big enough. If you're going to crash it, let's say you got 10 hours before you got to be to a train station. You got all your stuff with you. You got the lockers there. You just want to chill out and sleep for like 4 or 5 hours before you get on your plane or something. Those Beehive hotels are perfect. But if you're going to be living in that thing, not a chance. They're super noisy. People always doing stuff, watching, everybody's watching their devices. Hardly anybody plugs in headphones, and people are moving in and shuffling out and scraping and scratching and zippering. And, it's just like it was living in a youth hostel back in the 90s, traveling through South Africa or something. Youth hostels were awesome, but they were noisy as can be. You got to be, earplugs or a heavy sleeper. Same thing with the Beehive Hotel, but you get very little space. And, at $80 a night, those little things are like $80 a night in Japan. And, it's crazy what they can get in Tokyo for those things. In Chiba also. But let me throw something unusual at you here. Like we're talking about the food supplies. And Ransom, since you had a friend of mine sent me this article, which I never would have found myself. So as I'm looking across, Konstantin Christokoulos sent me this one here. Konstantin, shout out. Thank you for that. I never would have found it without you here. This one. Kharkova Dam disaster, the impact on Ukrainian crop production. Remember how that dam was blown up and then it cracked and it flooded all the farm fields? Well, they finally have some real numbers here that they're looking at. And the deficit, which will be created, but that also affects the exports coming out of. So basically what it means with the export reductions and the reductions in growing, we're going to really start to feel across the world the reduction coming out of Ukraine's grains. Ukraine was a huge exporter. They used to export 30 million tons a year. And those were the dogs playing. And that was weird because when we were just talking before, my dogs just stood at the door and they started barking like something was out there. So I had to go look with the flashlight. So here we go. They're looking at a minimum 10,000 tons of corn, 100,000 tons of wheat, and 26,000 tons of oil seed. And that will be followed on by another 309,000 hectares, which is, if you got to multiply by 2.4 to actually get the proper amount of acres to hectares. So your conversion is 2.4 for one. So if you say even 300,000 hectares times 2.4, you get 624,000 acres. Like these are the kind of losses that they're looking at. 50,000 hectares, which is 20,000 acres. 30,000 hectares, which is 70,000 acres. It just keeps adding up these little gouges everywhere. And I had also, this is a follow-up to some reports I'd had earlier. This year, the planting total space, all of it in Ukraine is only 11% of the normal of what it was in, say, like 2016. Way before the war, way before COVID, the amount of arable space that they were able to get in planted, especially now for the winter wheat, because this is kind of one you want to put in the ground because it gets cooler in Ukraine than, it's chilly in the winter. So they get everything planted right about now. They're looking at 11%. So then you look at the loss of water in the reservoir, that 94% of irrigation systems in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, and what's that? I can't even pronounce that. Dnipropetrovsk. Excuse me if I mispronounced. That was my best attempt. That's such a beautifully complex language. But 30% there. So you're looking, you got to think about American farm fields too, like the amount of irrigation that we use to provide and grow those crops for everybody. If we were to lose 94% of irrigation across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska, can you imagine what would happen to our crop production? Well, the same thing happened there. 74% in Kherson, 94% in Kherson, 74% in Zaporizhzhia. These are major grain growing areas. These are the Lion's basket share of its particular type of grain. And they even mentioned it. Was it corn or was it wheat? And again, they didn't really break it down. Was it winter wheat? Was it hard red winter? Was it durum? Was it white? Was it soft white? They didn't break that down so cleanly on the types of wheat. They just said wheat. For me, I would like to know which type of wheat. But then you'd probably just have to look into the United States Department of Agriculture website, find the maps for crop production, and then pop in on the month and then see what was being sown or harvested right now, and then you could probably get a better idea of that in those three regions. But wherever you look, with this cold front coming in, I am pretty sure there's going to be a lot of destroyed agriculture out here. Like to get into the low or high 20 Fahrenheit range this early in the year is kind of rare. Things have had a chance to like harden off and let the water repel or drip down from the stems or from the leaves. Can you imagine 27-degree temperatures on all the leaves in the forest? Like usually they cool down and they change color because it's slow. The sugars are doing their thing in the plants and the trees. Because it gets cool, it gets in the 50s, and then the high 40s, and it's in the mid 50s, and it's the 60s. It's bouncing around, but you don't normally get 26, 27, 28-degree Fahrenheit. Boom, those just freeze everything, fall straight off. So that's for us in North America here, and I don't know, Ransom. This year looks crazy for the food price because last week, remember, we talked about the Food and Agricultural Organization from the United Nations, the FAO, predicting 100% food price increases over the next 12 months. That's another doubling of food, and that's from the UN, United Nations, FAO, telling everybody across the world, hey, all of you in impoverished nations, I think they were more like directing the message, your food's going to double. So think about what's already been done for destruction of spending power in America alone or in Europe just because of food prices and energy prices. These are slated to double again in the next 12 months. So, looking out, how do you prepare? And then we got these early freezes coming in. So if you are growing your own veg, you're really going to have to protect it, or you're going to have to go back to the supermarket and start buying stuff because you got completely frozen out. This is the thing, like row cover right now. Even me, I'm just going to say something, Ransom, and I'll let you get back in, is like if you have money and you want to park it into some goods that you think will hold value over the long term that are not taking up a lot of space to store, think row covering. It's thin white. It's almost like sheeny types of drapes, if you will. It prevents the cold from actually going down and killing your plants. So most people use a hoop with it, and they lay it across all the susceptible crops. And also in the springtime, you could use that same row cover to start your plants early and germinate them if you're in a protected area without the wind and the wind chill. So you got the added benefit of 3 weeks early starting of your starters to get them out by using that same row cover in the same hoops, or extending your season way past. Like this freeze, it's going to be like a super freeze for a few days, and whatever's out there is going to get frozen. And then it'll go back to normal temperatures and then just continue the rest of, October into November like we normally do. But the row cover, like, getting excess and extra row cover would be a huge, huge one for me. Because can you imagine what you could trade for that or barter for that in terms of, I need about 50 feet of row cover. Man, we're going to lose our gardener. I need 100 feet. Hey, what would you trade for that? You're going to lose all of your vegetable production, or you're going to trade for 100 feet or 200 feet of row cover. You're losing hundreds, if not, multiple $500 to $1,000 worth of vegetables. Now, what's that row cover worth it to you? So these are the kind of things, crop cover, there's many words for this. So anyway, Ransom, I think that, the extremes are starting to manifest here with these magnetic fields, like these low temperature events and the low pressure systems are going to get unleashed. And they're going to be unleashed and continuing to ravage the planet in the southern part of our world from the Hunga Tonga eruption, all that extra water vapor. So we're getting extremely late let-offs in winter in the southern hemisphere, which is going to delay their planting in the southern hemisphere. And all the UVB radiation affecting the crops down there from that. I was looking at the NASA ozone watch, as well, the NASA ozone hole watch. I'll send you the link here, Ransom. But the ozone hole is not an ozone hole anymore. It's an ozone oval. That's the first time they've seen this oval shape. And when I say oval, I'm talking almost like a donut oval, looking at it from the side. Like really, it's a very elliptical looking ozone hole over our southern hemisphere. And then you combine all these early season cold, the crop losses because of wars, crop losses because of not enough energy, processing, fertilizers, etc. I really can see why the UN said that food prices will double over the next 12 months. And I'll leave it there. I'm going to get you some links for the NASA Ozone Watch.
I think, they're probably telling people that because that is the plan for the next year or so, is to really hurt people around the world. And sadly, millions of people are falling into the trap. Now, I know a lot of people are aware of what's going on the border, but I want you to think about those little tiny homes there. And, you were mentioning the little hotel, the Beehive Hotel thing. And in general, in Japan, everything's small. Like they've learned to, pack everything up, have a set of belongings for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, and put everything up and then get ready for sleeping. And they've learned how to, live in a compact space. That being said, these little things that they're talking about have already been used in the U.S. And we had dramatic different outcomes of similar living conditions. Now, part of it's because, the Japanese culture really doesn't deal with crime. People don't really commit that much crime on top of that. That versus the same thing over here where people are being raped, robbed, and murdered in the same conditions. Now, given these were places set up for people that didn't have things, and the people in Japan are people that have enough money to at least rent the spaces. So there is a big difference in scenario. But the idea is being pushed off everywhere, including Europe. And it makes you wonder, like, why? At the same time that, I covered the articles about the housing problem and that, people can't afford to buy land. They can't afford to buy a new house. They can't afford to get in a house. They can't afford rent. But at the same time, you look at these articles right here, thousands of migrants are being dropped off on San Diego streets. Now, this is just one of many cities where hundreds of thousands. And then when you start adding up all of them, it is millions. Now, early 2000s, we admitted that there was at least 20 million non-resident illegal occupants in the country. Now, since then, we've admitted year by year that millions have been coming in over the course of a decade and a half at least. So I'm putting that number myself, probably double or a little over double of the amount of people. And then where does this end? If there's problems with the economy, there's problems with not enough jobs there. And this is funny because they tell you that there's so many jobs out there and the economy's great. It's fine economics. But the 24-hour stores where I live can't even stay open because they can't get two employees to work. And there are jobs there that some people will not work. And then you're increasing the amount of people, and there's only 2 or 3 jobs available. So, like in a smaller area. So somebody's going to take those jobs, which leaves lots of people without jobs. And then you continually see this wave of stories like this. Here's another one. In rare New York City visit, Texas Governor Greg Abbott lauds Mayor Adams, Governor Hutchell for pursuing Biden over migrant crisis, which is funny because these are the same people that are now complaining that so many people are showing up in their municipality that they cannot deal with it. And so you have articles like this from Yahoo Finance. New York City tells migrants you are better off somewhere else. They don't mind the idea of a bunch of people coming. They just don't want to deal with it or pay for it or have it where they live, which is creating, an issue. And then you can tell that we're going to a place very fast where there would be the conditions for them to tell you there's a reason why there's no food. And I'll get into that right now. Why the Pentagon's killer robots are spurring major concerns, because they're producing a lot of them, because we're about to go to World War. People still are trying to put off. And here's a key one that I think everybody should pay attention to. U.S. will not have any pandas for the first time in 50 years. Now, maybe you don't think that's a big deal, but I see that as a major sign of relations between the United States and China, because, China loves the panda bear. It's an icon They get upset when pandas are mistreated or have problems in other countries when they loan them out. They consider them a state property or a national treasure for China. So the United States will not have any pandas in any of our zoos for the first time in 50 years. That tells you where things are going. China is investing billions in global disinformation campaigns, according to our government. You can take that with a grain of salt. I don't doubt that at all.
Is that the new salt from Bill Gates I can take that with?
Yeah, probably, so you could be hooked up with their new products. Chinese hackers nab about 60,000 emails in the State Department breach. Now, in my opinion, I think that these are probably secrets that they have already had back from 33,000 missing emails and beyond. But we're going into this technological future now that people are about to have to deal with. They can't ignore it. And this is all part of the population reduction thing. And, I talked a lot about Musk and his chip, but he's also setting up the network for this to be anywhere in the world where people are connected. And I really want to get into this in the second half is what's called the Internet of Things and how it's going to affect you and your life from here on out. Needing space, terrifying video reveals Elon Musk's huge army of satellites. As scientists warn Starlink's hidden danger, and they're saying that they're going to outnumber the stars in the visible sky. And they're not just talking about Elon Musk, because he's only one crazy billionaire that's putting up a lot of satellites. He's only one of many governments and other NGOs that are also doing the same thing. We're about to go into a terrifying new era of when technology interrupts what your dream that they've been giving out. And I'll get into that when we come back from the break. But needless to say that there is a plan. And like always, they have little acronyms for it. They're leading you in a certain direction. And I'll try to show that when we come back. But meanwhile, on the World War front, I think you're going to see a lot more headlines on this. Now, keep in mind that I don't know the motivation behind the shooter, as Dutch police say that 3 people were killed in shooting at a university hospital in the home of Rotterdam. Now, I don't know the motivation behind this, but I have a feeling that in the near future, from East Europe to West Europe, we're about to see a lot of these kind of little skirmishes setting off, which are going to be used for further proxy wars until we're in an already claimed war. Because if you listen to Russia and China and Biden, we're already at war with China and Russia. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But when we get back, I really want to talk about the connection that the Internet of Things and algorithms, learning machines, and AI are about to sweep people off their feet worldwide. And I think it goes right into the depopulation agenda that's going on.
And please remember, cast your vote Bigfoot for president 2024. Ransom, I also sent you the NASA ozone hole watch for the Antarctic. Take a look at the 21st September 2023, and then we can compare it to 21st September 2021 pre-Hunga Tonga eruption, and then see how the ozone is spilling more to the ozone hole. The depletion in the column is spilling more toward the southern part of South America. Usually, it's not as deep into the blue as we would now. And remember, the ozone hole in earnest will not reach its maximum until the end of October or the middle of November. It depends. It straggles on those 2 weeks. And if it does continue in the same direction, that'll be direct ground UVB over the southern part of South America. And you just have to wonder, how this affects the sea life. We talked about the penguins being blinded by the UVB radiation, and the reason they're washing up with no food in their stomachs is the same effects that we're seeing with now UVB showing on the maps, that it is over the ground now, the UVB radiation striking the southern part of South America. Not so much in southern Africa or southern Australia, but the NASA ozone hole watch definitely shows where the amount of Dobson units is incredibly minimal, going to almost zero. So you have to think, how much further is that going to stretch up and what kind of effects would there be? Barley is the number one crop affected. But, South America, huge producer of grains also. And that would be an effect of the planet's hydrological system and ozone regulation system being bent out of the normal due to the water vapor blasting up 180,000 feet in the atmosphere after the Tonga eruption. So now add that into the quiver of disruption or reductions in yield across the planet. Like, you can almost game this out, forecast it out into, okay, we got losses in Kyrgyzstan, we got losses in Ukraine, we got losses across Central Europe, the United States because of all the droughts. Wheat's going to a 100-year low again this year. Now we need to start subtracting production out of the Southern Hemisphere. Get out the calculators, because when we come back, how's AI going to grow our food for us? See, this is the thing. If it can't grow the food, there's no need for it.
A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. That's why we must steer our own future. For the last 10,000 years at least, gold has rarely suffered from economic and political crises, as it has always been a stable. Gold is perceived as a symbol of wealth, power, and majesty. Gold has had an exalted position throughout the ages as a highly coveted, even worshipped material. That's why most every major civilization has collected and saved gold. Gold has maintained its worth and usefulness as currency throughout time and will continue to do so. Gold has an important economic role as a means of exchange should currency collapse, insurance that will protect you and your families against financial turmoil of any kind. ITM Trading is a precious metals company that has been in business for over 27 plus years, with a mission to educate and empower individuals to hedge against inflation, mitigate financial risk, and prepare for the Great Reset. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call, 866-834-1422, 866-834-1422.
Mountain High Time, 2 hours of an organization to the madness, discussing the ever-changing dynamics of being both physically and mentally prepared for a plethora of possible outcomes to our future and present. A look into the latest technologies, new scientific discoveries, and how they might be used in connection to the human domain and controlling it, ancient cultures and places. Be warned. This is an opinionated look through headlines, guests that are not afraid to question the narrative, a little bit of crazy ramblings of a stoner conspiracy factist that pushes constitutional concepts. The place and the time are the same, another dimension we call Mountain High Time. Saturdays 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Mountain High Time, right here on Revolution.radio, where information never sleeps and truth breaks the spell.
You have a choice in today's unstable world. Eat Z-Bugs or plan ahead. Eat Z-Bugs or buy the storable foods. When a disaster strikes, we may find ourselves confined to our homes or shelters for days or weeks. In such situations, having a supply of nutritious, non-perishable, and easy-to-prepare food is vital. By incorporating these additional items, your emergency survival food kit becomes even more comprehensive and capable of sustaining you and your family during extended periods of disruption. Having a well-prepared emergency food supply can make a significant difference in natural disasters or unexpected emergencies. It provides reassurance and a sense of control, knowing that you and your loved ones have the necessary sustenance to endure challenging circumstances. Beyond the tangible benefits, building an emergency food kit is an act of responsible citizenship. By taking personal preparedness seriously, we reduce the burden on emergency services and relief organizations, allowing them to focus their efforts on those in dire need of assistance. Investing time and thought into creating your emergency food supply is a proactive step towards safeguarding your well-being and your family. With the right food supplies, you can maintain your physical and mental well-being and face any unforeseen event with resilience and strength. HeavensHarvest.com. Use promo code ADAPT and save 15% at checkout. Don't be forced to eat Z-bugs.
And now on with the video.
Now how much push there is to silence messages across the world. So Revolution Radio, also thank you for letting us broadcast our message here. And for anybody out there considering a donation tonight, not into my or Ransom's coffers, but to Revolution Radio, so we can continue to have this venue to push our ideas. Some maybe appear outlandish, you know, Bigfoot for president 2024, just having a little fun. But then other more serious topics, which, you know, in a lot of venues, I'm going to have to tone down when I'm doing my final edit to go across the algo rhythm. Speaking of AI, now Ransom, before the break, you know, I know you wanted to talk about AI and the possibilities of it. I've seen some articles already where this AI craze has peaked, just like blockchain phase had peaked through corporate America. Remember back in 2017, 2016, 17, 18, nobody in corporate America heard blockchain. But then as soon as they put blockchain behind their name on something, their valuations increased 20% overnight, and then everybody jumped on the blockchain bandwagon. Now every Fortune 5, corporate 5 has a blockchain team with them, because they have to. Everybody had to keep up to the newest moving technologies. Now we saw ChatGPT come out and the use of AI for interactive AI on the personal level. I understand with you know, BlackRock, what they're running with Aladdin. You know, it's a little bit different. And you know, where does it take us next? Because it's going to be the same kind of MO where every single company across the planet is going to have to continue to adopt ever and greater, more powerful AI to stay competitive with everybody else. So how does that fit into the Internet of Things, where they want you to have everything electric, everything's monitored, everything's metered? Now, we could go into the one side of it, oh, they're going to turn you off if you say something bad or whatever. But I think there's a level way, way deeper than that. You know, if we go back in and we talk about the jinn and the different epochs of history where they've referenced this technological dark entity that comes to try to take over humanity. Luckily for us, so far the track record's been 100%. It gets kicked back for however many thousands of years until this thing returns again. But, you know, where does that take us to the Internet of Things? And what does that entail, really, the Internet of Things? Would it involve quantum dust at the very minimum? Because you couldn't keep track of everything in real time unless it was continually dusted, so you'd have new parameters of where the new dust landed, so you knew something had moved. So it'd be continuous nano dust fest, because that's one of the ways the world around could process with AI and supercomputing. But at the point, you know, Ransom, you can explain it better than I. But with sentient and generative AI taking over the entire landscape, you know, humanity, if we leave it too much in control of our food and food growing systems, food delivery, you know, imagine if you left some sort of artificial intelligence to blend your fertilizers, and then it realized one day, I don't like humans, I'm going to blend their fertilizer wrong to make sure it wipes out all the plants. Because you get so dependent on it, so mechanized, like maybe the first 50 applications, oh man, this AI is great, look at this precision, that you don't even check it on the 51st application, and the AI is like, no, we don't want, humans are bad, we need to get rid of humans, and then it tweaks out the phosphorus ratio or something, and you wouldn't even think about looking at it, and then suddenly all your plants are dead in the field, and you're going, whoa, what just happened? Well, there was a 1% mixture of some sort of glyphosate in there with the fertilizer. My bad. Where's it take us, leaving so much control in finance, shipping, logistics, and production of food in that, supply chain to get our foods, and the factories that are running on AI to make them more efficient that process the foods. I mean, I just named 3 or 4 chains that could get cut right there, links in the chains that would devastate humanity. I mean, devastate humanity. If we had our food production reduced 50% for just 1 year alone, there'd be game over. So I don't know how deep you want to go in the conversation, Ransom, but I'm willing to go as deep as you want to go because I said Bigfoot for president 2024.
Well, I think Bigfoot might lose the presidency in 2024 to the AI, which may have already won several elections. So we're allowed to say that on YouTube because they changed
he's a
their
real leader.
rules.
Bigfoot's a real leader.
Yeah, he is. At least he's terrestrial. And that's exactly kind of what I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to blend ancient technology and the ancient world with what's going on today. And I want to take you back to, let's just say 600 AD. This is about 50 years after the events that killed billions of people all over the world. And at this time period, we see civilizations disappear. We also see new civilizations form, creating new ways of living and new technology. And one of those examples I've talked about before was in the American Southwest. Excuse me. In the American Southwest, about 600 AD, in Chaco Canyon, a new type of living started, where they started building silos, pantries to put stuff in. They started farming more, started utilizing tools. They literally, within a period of 1 or 2 years, walked out of the Stone Age and increased their civilization to an agrarian civilization. Now, this might have been forced upon them by the events of the last 50 years, but it's not the only place, and I'll get back to that. But for now, let's talk about what's going on now. And what I call it is more of a devolution, I guess you would say it. Not an evolution, but a devolution of mankind. And the reason I say that is because the intellectual property of humankind is being taken and controlled. Now, the article I have up right now is called, "Can AI Plan the Economy?" Well, I think it's already abundantly clear that the AI can not only plan the economy, but has been for decades, as evidenced in Wall Street, where algorithms have been doing the bulk of all trading and everything for some time. There's a lot of traders that admit they have no idea how it even works. And some of those are some of the people that were the designers of the stock market in the first place. So we get to this point now. Can AI plan the economy? Not only can it plan the economy, but I feel that it may be able to plan the decrease in the amount of food produced in the world year by year in a controlled demolition fashion, which will correlate to a dwindling population. Now, why do I say that? Because it's taking over the cognitive abilities and the intellectual playing field that humans were the king of up until this point. We were the people that brought you the Renaissance, all of these ideas that came out, complex mathematics, all of this stuff. Now, were we helped? I don't know. That's a theory for some people, that we were helped and we were giving a foot up, and that's how so fast we got to this point after the last reset. There's a lot of theories about that, but here we are. And let's skip to what I was actually talking
Ransom,
about.
could I throw a lexicon little change in there for you? Instead of saying reset, just substitute the word reconfiguration.
Okay, well, yeah, it is a reconfiguration of everything human, not only from the way we live our life, the way we eat our food, what we like and dislike. But let's move to this term that's basically at the heart of what I'm talking about. The term is the Internet of Things. This refers to a collective network of connected devices and the technology that facilitates communication between the devices and the cloud, as well as between devices themselves. Now, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal. Matter of fact, it sounds like a great innovation of how our technology works in this day, why we have phones, tablets, internet, et cetera, et cetera. But now we're going into the time of integrated chips and integrated technology into literally our body in various forms, from nanodust to actual chips that are the size of a quarter that they're planning on putting in people's heads. They're giving you the reasons that, oh, it'll help paralyze people, it'll do this, it'll do that. But the ultimate idea, admittedly, from the various sources of this technology, is that they would have a metaverse that where everybody goes, a replacement of the internet. And this is only accessible if you have the proper digital ID. You have to have this digital ID to be able to use the future of the Internet of Things. Now, remember that IoT, Internet of Things, covers everything. That's from the chips in your head to the chips in your palm to the payment chips to your phone to your gadgets, all of it. The interconnected web of technology that is now surrounding and choking out life on Earth right now. Okay, so let's go to another idea. Excuse me, that was actually a Freudian slip there. Now, you're going to need this digital ID to do anything. When it comes to accessing any kind of terminal, to get money, to do banking, even interact with the government soon, as we've seen with the shutdowns due to so-called conditions of biological entities floating around the earth, i.e. COVID. Government shut down, all kinds of stuff shut down, industry shut down. We saw it happen. It could happen again for different reasons, but that's not really the point. It was a beta run to see if they could do that. Switch over what is usually done in a physical location using normal human activity and switch it over to a completely digital world. So this is the Internet of Things that they got you used to in the last 5 or 6 years, so a complete immersion into this technology. Now, you're going to need an ID. Now, an ID, a lot of people think of as an identification, but the word ID itself is a noun, which means that the part of the mind which is innate, instinctive, impulses, and primary processes are manifested, right? So now think about that really. So when you combine the two words, ID, that you're going to need to use for the Internet of Things, what's that spell out? It spells out idiot. A stupid person, an archaic term of a person of low intelligence. Now, that sounds like something offensive, and you probably wouldn't be able to say that about a person in today's world. However, after the processing power, the history, the math, the media, the entertainment, all forms of literature and the in between of ideas will be connected into this IoT, and you need the ID to enter into the IoT or even, interact with it at all, which makes you have an ID for the IoT, which is an idiot. Now, that sounds like silly and maybe coincidental, and I really think of Jordan Maxwell when it comes to the introduction of hidden language in your face. So you think about this, and what is it? What does this really mean? Well, it actually means that from now into the future, all programs, all networks, everything will be controlled by this Internet of Things in which you need an ID to access. And that covers everything. And that's what we've been talking about with the digital world currency. That's what we've been talking about a world ID. They need this to happen in order to have their one world government, one world policing system to enforce climate regulations. Now, that comes in especially after they've controlled everything, especially the buying and selling of goods between nations and individual people, to where they can start penalizing it with military force climate violations. And what are those violations I'm talking about? Well, as you can see the trend of how the World Economic Forum and the countries that capitulate with them are doing. They're banning things like carbon dioxide, nitrogen in the soil, eating meat. They're promoting eating bugs. And these are all items that have to do with the reduction of population. So you can use a military force to enforce climate rules, or you won't be able to participate in the buying and selling or eating or entertainment or anything. And if you decide to be a natural living human being and go out into the world and farm, ranch, grow your own food, this will make you an enemy of the state. A, because you're outside of the Internet of Things. And B, because they've listed all of regular human activity as some kind of crime against the earth, the environment, and people as a whole. So you can see that this trend would, go into the realm of population reduction. And need I remind you that they are using AIs to control most systems already. So the idea on whether or not an AI could control an economy is preposterous. We know that it can. It already is. That's going on in real time and has been for multiple decades. Now you combine all these ideas of cloning technologies, gene manipulation, population reduction, the idea that you can create human beings without mothers, fathers, and they can be properties of the state and indoctrinated from birth to death in the system, where they would have to be from birth to death a participant in the Internet of Things, in which case each person would not have a name of any kind of religious or ethnic background. Instead, they would have a number, like a prison number or an identification number, the ID for the Internet of Things, making them an idiot. They would be, I've also been reading a lot about that stress, which is invoked by all forms of media, as we talk about the fear propaganda, and the implantation of chips and not just the physical implantation, but just the interaction around Wi-Fi makes people nervous. It makes them nervous. And they can't explain why. And they say that, don't worry about it. It doesn't affect your cognitive problems, but it does have the effect of being nervous. Well, being nervous leads you into certain directions. And when you have a media that is pumping out misinformation, then you get propagandized to a point where you lose your cognitive abilities. And now when we know that AI is not only controlling those networks of economics, healthcare, etc., but they also control the media. They're using it to write speeches, to write stories, to write articles. Now you have a complete top-down, completely controlled system by an algorithm that is replacing the cognitive functions of the human being, which makes us idiots. Not to mention any other, programs like with fluoride, or you could go on and on about programs that are used to dumb down the populations of any particular nation. And I wanted to let you kind of dive into that. And then I want to go back after you're done and talk about ancient civilizations and what they're making illegal. Kind of what I described there, the natural living man, and how they were doing it in the Amazon about 600 AD, which was right after a global catastrophe, a catastrophe that reached all corners of the earth. And then look at some of the inventions and ideas that they came up with, seemingly just in the middle of the jungle. And you also sent me an article about a big pyramid found, and I'll show that too. But in the jungles of the Amazon, they've discovered they had a formula for what's called dark earth, and we have now discovered that formula through living descendants and comparing that to different sediment deposits found. And now we know that there was a massive civilization all over South America that was living in tune with nature, creating gardens around them. They weren't using big stones like some of the other cultures. They were literally making the jungle a living environment for a wild living man. And they were eating good, and they replaced the jungle trees with fruit trees. They replaced the wild plants with food plants. They grew medicine all in between their houses and around, and with sacred geometry at the core of all of it.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. I sent you a few images to put up here with that bit of, as soon as you said going back in the past, I started to think about, what do we know about the past? If we look just even in the last 10,000 years, and I gave you that Greenland GISP2 ice core temperature for the last 10,000 years data set. Each time the temperature drops out, there's a reset in society. So you have to think about what you spoke there. This new human that's going to be a grown human, for me, it's nothing more than a worker class for the Anunnaki. When we go back to the stories, think about if you do take Sitchin's, stories or translations, and I sent you a real nice, beautiful cuneiform text. I think it's one of the best ones I've ever seen of a clay tablet, so clean. Never saw one this clean before. This is like the most astounding cuneiform writing tablet that I've, in my, how many years of searching through this stuff, this is the best one I've ever seen. Unbelievable clarity. So think translating these, 20,000 of these tablets to reconstruct human history through the eyes of those who came here first from wherever that established the Sumerian society and culture 7,000 years prior. They wrote about going back 400,000 years. So if we're looking at the GISP2 ice core data set, and I see at least 4 to 5 complete wipeouts of society just in the temperature chart dropping where they couldn't grow enough food, I'm thinking that's 5 chances for the same exact thing to happen again. Because, how much do we really know about history? How much is going to be erased 8,000 years ago, 6,000 years, 4,000 years, 2,000 years ago? History's murky. We don't even really know from the 1600s how much was reset, destroyed, or rewritten to give us a false history. That's 10,000 years, and then, the translations through these cuneiform texts, so 400,000 years. I'm looking at it as, okay, something with hyper, intelligent tech has been running this game with reset. Maybe the human reaches its usefulness and then suddenly becomes too intelligent and they realize, oh, we got to rinse and repeat. So perhaps these cataclysms for our Earth are on cyclical patterns, and they know, all right, well, we ran it to this point. They're going to get wiped out anyway. Let's just wipe them out and restart a different Homo sapiens species, a new worker class. And I wonder how many times this thing has been run through history. Because if you look at the few of the artifacts that I sent you, especially the one that was a solid emerald, with a clock in the middle of an emerald that is so thin on the gold microplating that we can't replicate that today on the face of the spiral of that, embedded in one solid emerald, complete emerald. Without cracking, they set a clock in there. That's insane. Like some of this microfine, the Astronomical Compendium from 1550, excuse me. I mean, the gold leaves and the gold sheetings with such precision. I mean, it's as thin as a credit card, but on both sides with diagrams of the constellations, specifically Ursa Major. Why is everybody focusing on the Big Dipper is another thing. The sextants also included with this, and the phases of the moon and the sun and the movements of the constellations through the heavens too. All on this credit card thin gold leaf in the 1550s. That's multiple pages that fold in on themselves on anything as fine as you could possibly see, with gear works and it looks like a door hinge, but at microfine scale. I mean, the artwork on these gold objects and the precision of them and the different languages written in show that, you know what, there was definitely something going on that was left over from the last world. And we could talk about Tartaria and mud flood, and I just did a recent video looking at Prague because I traveled there a couple years ago, just as COVID was starting right at the beginning of 2020. And then after that, we came back to the States and haven't been out really internationally since. But I was looking through the photos the other day. And there's substantial, visual reference in the 1500s and early 1600s that there was something else going on in these cities in terms of electrical production, electrical delivery. And it just seems that there's many a chapter of missing history, but it all has one thing in common. It comes to that collapse phase, and a new type of human comes out of it each and every single individual time. I'm just wondering, the magnetic field changes, the electromagnetic frequency changes coming out of the sun and the recent, this arm of the galaxy that we're in, the spiral arm. There's just so many things that rinse and repeat, but the complexity. And, when I say complexity, these are things that we cannot even replicate today with the best technologies. And even if you were to use AI to construct a solid emerald and put a working watch inside with 2 micron thick gold layering over that, it's a no-go today. So how did they do it some 400 or 500 years prior? It means that there was something else going on, that history's definitely been rewritten. And you have to wonder, if I could actually transport somebody from, say, 1550 into today's world, like how would they look at the world? Not about the politics and the economy and all these things going on, but just our inventions compared to what they would have known. And don't delude yourself that everybody was living with the pigs and the straw on the back of the barns in 1450 and everybody was a serf. It wasn't like that. History is cleanly given to us, so you believe such a thing. There's something else much deeper, much more technologically advanced, that wasn't brought forth to this new iteration of humanity. So it'll be the same thing. What will be lost from this transmission of knowledge to the next world after this reconfiguration occurs? But it's going to be a natural cycle. It's going to be a geopolitical cycle, an economic cycle, and a food cycle. So after this one, do you think they're really going to bring the entire internet uncensored through to the next iteration? That's no different than looking at the manuscripts today. How many of us are allowed to go in and look at manuscripts in the 14 and 1500s in libraries, museums? You aren't. Unless you're a scholar, and then they're limiting it to what you could publish. Also, if you publish the incorrect things, you're not allowed back into the manuscript libraries. See, that's the thing. So they got you. So you can't get your degree. You can't continue your research. You can't continue to get your grant funding. You can't continue even to be allowed in the building to view the manuscripts if you give the wrong version of history. You're removed from that entire viewing process and explanation to the public of it. So anyway, I see a wafer thin piece of emerald there that would easily crack and break. If anybody was like any lapidaries out there, I encourage you to look at this and see how complex and difficult it would be to mount a watch inside a solid emerald, which in today's terms would be, how many millions of dollars do you think the emerald would be worth just by itself? Now that's a very, 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 very large, very clear emerald. Definitely looks like it came from Brazil or something with that aqua blue in it. Anyway, man, I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of that graph. And I wanted to point some things out about the graph there that we know about history. And part of it's what I was just talking about before. You got 539 AD. We all consider that. Historians consider that. Geoclimatologists or whatever, they all agree this was supposed to be the worst year in human history, at least on record. And if you look at this graph here, you go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bumps, and that's that exact spot. And that's a little tiny dip compared to the other 3 major dips. And you can see over time that not only CO2, but the temperature was way up, way above what it is today. But let's go back even further on this. Back to the beginning of the Olmec calendar, or as a lot of people know it today as the Mayan calendar, which would be right there where you see this major drop about 5,024 years ago. That would be right there where they started the calendar. Now, when they started that calendar, obviously, they had all the information in regards to the precession of the equinox. That's 26,000 years. And to know that it repeats, you would have had to have 52,000 years worth of celestial observation to even know that. So think about how far back in time. You see that big old dip. That was when they started the calendar for this kind of new time. And you can see we had the Minoan warming, the Roman warming, the medieval warming, all of these way hotter than it is right now. And they're telling you we're burning up with the lowest CO2 here just about on this graph. But think about that. That little tiny dip right there, I think it's like the 5th one back, would have been 539 AD. And this is when the time of period that I wanted to get into. Because not only did the Mayans disappear right then for like hundreds of years, but like I said, in Chaco Canyon, people started building monuments, celestial calendars, and different things. But besides that, in the Amazon, some weird stuff was going on too. So we know that all over the globe, an event happened that triggered, from what I understand, they have located cosmogenic dust in the ice caps at that exact time, meaning that possibly either random events happened where some kind of object came in and into the northern hemisphere and deposited either dust, debris, or whatever that already had put some kind of cloud up in the atmosphere. Following this,
Wait, what year was that? I'm sorry, Ransom, to cut you off. What year was that?
That's 539 AD. That's when Halley's Comet, they believe a chunk of Halley's Comet.
That was only 1,500 years ago. Yeah. Okay, keep going.
All right. So this happens all around the world, from China, Japan. There are reports of massive volcanic activity going on. We know activity happened in El Salvador, in the Mayan territory, most likely in North America. We know that stuff happened in Italy, all over the place. Volcanoes were popping their tops. So it was dark for 18 months. Millions of people starved, flash freezing of crops in China. They document it. The loudest sound that anybody ever heard came from around, down around the Java Islands, because something also went off there. So we know multiple volcanoes went off in that year. Now, right after that, the Mayans just disappear. But all these other civilizations pop up. And like I was saying, like Chaco Canyon up here, we find evidence of Mesoamericans that had moved from Central America up to the North American areas because their bones are left at Chaco Canyon. We know they were Mesoamericans. They've DNA tested them. There's positive for Aztec DNA, Mayan DNA, not to mention they pretty much knew they were Mesoamericans because of the carved teeth that they found on them. Now, I wanted to talk about this stuff in the Amazon, if I can get it up here. This is like magic of the old world. So whatever happened, people abandoned cities back at this time period. And all over the world, like you have Teotihuacan under probably debris. It's under debris. You have a lot of the Mayan pyramids under debris. They talked about like lava, just choking out the rivers and killing all their crops and stuff. But it seems that they just migrated to other new places, like, obviously climate change leads to people moving. And there's a secret that's no one could ever figure out that was down here in the Amazon. It's how did they grow their foods inside the jungle when the soil doesn't support food growing? Well, they were creating it by using composting materials, by burning, making ash and stuff. And now we're finding the remnants of populations that are just unimaginable, hidden in the forest down there. That pops up right about 600 AD, the same exact time period that other people pop up. So you also got the Paracas culture and the Wari culture that just pop up to dominance at that time. So you see, and we know that the DNA from the Paracas people and the Wari people had European, Eurasian DNA in it. They were redheaded. Some of them were blonde. They had elongated skulls. So we know there was massive migrations of people all over the place. I'm having trouble. Here it is. Finally found it right when I was going to say I couldn't find it. But here it is in the Amazon. Archaeologists have discovered 11 lost settlements beneath the Amazon. And this includes a lot of pyramids and other things, like total civilization hidden. And the recipe for dark earth finally uncovered in the Amazon depths. This is something we didn't know. And I want people to look at this map. And you see the sacred geometry. And if you've seen this map, you've seen this all over the world. It's a celestial calendar. They were marking the times. And you see exactly that they had, a whole forest mapped out. Inside here, they had gardens. And they replaced the trees. We're talking about a massive human undertaking to get to the point where they created a living farming permaculture forest that supported a massive population. And we're talking big cities. And now they weren't built out of stone. They were built out of, wood and mud and different things like that. But the point that I'm making is that even though a calamity happened all over the world, which, by the way, according to that graph, is one of the smaller ones, right? This is one of the smaller little dips on that graph over time. people had to change their whole fundamental way of life, it seems. And they started migrating to new places with new foods, but they had technology with them. They already knew how to transform this forest into agriculture and farming land. And we're just finding, and here's this one about this Bronze Age hexagonal pyramid, not like anything found in the Eurasian steppe. We keep finding these new civilizations, and every single time they have sacred geometry, complex mathematics, and an indication that they had information from their ancient world. And they are in our ancient world. So it's not like, you fast forward, you get Plato and different people talking about that. So now we have this uncovering of the last time that this happened at the exact time as we're talking about a reconfiguration of the world's knowledge and a whole new way of living for all human beings. Now, I know there's a lot of older people out there, the Gen Xers and people older than that think, oh, I ain't going to participate in that. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter. You're going to be gone in 20 to 40 years. The new generations will be indoctrinated into this new lifestyle from birth. And at the same time, like I've said before, scientists are trying to bring back, not in a science fiction movie like Jurassic Park, but in real life, animals from Pleistocene areas all over the earth, which tells me they think it might get colder in the future. And they're, planning on different avenues to stay in control. So you have scientists that are now saying they can resurrect the Tasmanian devil because they found hidden RNA in an artifact. And then not to mention you saw the mammoth meatball. They're joking in our face about bringing back these extinct animals. And then also, weirdly, at the same time, I've been seeing article after article about extinct birds and extinct animals popping up in new regions. Maybe they were extinct. That's a real mystery if that's the case, but most likely they had just migrated into new areas that people weren't in. And now that things are changing again, things are being rearranged. These animals are popping up where people live now again. So farmer unknowingly captures animal extinct in region for over a century, but just pops up right there. All of a sudden, here he is. And I've been seeing a lot of different stories like that. So you sent me this article to kind of wrap this up. All of the stuff in the rainforest right there is just mind-blowing stuff. It's all sacred geometry. It's a bunch of evidence that people had a complete understanding of civilization and agriculture before they even started, changing their environment. And that was the answer whenever their civilization around the world collapsed, that they had to move back to an agrarian, permaculture, natural living man style. And I think that is the key for now when we're about to be replaced by a new kind of human being, that we have to break away and become two different kinds of human beings. I don't know how that's going to play out in the future, but back to the weather. I've been reading a lot about El Nino and La Nina and their cycles. And according to NOAA and everybody, we're supposed to have an extremely warm, wet, matter of fact, drought in some areas and overabundance of rain in other areas because of this cycle. But then you sent me this right after I read that, literally right after you read that, you sent me this other article from Zero Hedge talking about a major cold trend set to unleash frost freeze across the eastern U.S. Now, that makes you think, or me think, immediately of the year 539 AD, when exactly that happened all over the world and millions of people died. People don't understand that one little degree in the cold direction, not in the hot direction, it would be okay if it got hot. It would be okay if it got a lot hotter. Plants, animals, they would thrive in it. You wouldn't like it because your electricity bills would be up, but the animals and plants would love it. But in contrast, when things get abruptly cold and total environmental collapse happens. So it makes you wonder why all of their programs are targeted at making things even more colder when you know the science behind it, at the same time that we're at a time that most likely we're at the end of this interglacial period, and things for the next 80,000 years or so, well into the future, are going to get much colder. And not only that, it's going to change. It's going to change entire ecosystems, not unlike what's happened in the past. And we can see the evidence. And the question is when, abouts did that farming and the the rainforest stop? What happened that made their life come to an end?
Not really sure, but if you could come back to the graph with me of the ice cores and the temperature data set, because when you were looking at that, you spurred that idea. I was looking back at the 8.2K event, which is 8,200 years prior to modern day. So that's one of the largest drop-offs in the entire 10,000 year record there. And what they're showing, they think it was a Laurentide ice sheet, and a huge amount of water spilled into the Atlantic and disrupted the overturning oscillation, or the AMOC, which slowed that down, which then slowed down and created a lot more snow and glacial activity over Europe. And get this, the Northern Hemisphere monsoon precipitation declined by, well, excuse me, I got the chair there, 12.4% for every 1 degree Celsius of global mean temperature change. But if you look at that graph that I sent you there, you're looking at a 3 degrees Celsius drop. So multiply 12.4 by 3, and we're looking at about 36% of all the moisture in the atmosphere in the Northern Hemisphere stopped. That's because it was all new ice accumulation. Because if the overturning oscillation stops, and this is what The Day After Tomorrow is predicated on, that movie's based on the AMOC shutting off because of too much meltwater pumping in the same exact area. So really what The Day After Tomorrow was trying to explain to you the 8.2K event. And then if you look in the Southern Hemisphere, they have some numbers for you there too. 4.2% drop in moisture for every 1 degree Celsius drop in temperature. So you're looking at 4.3 or 4.2 times 3. So around 13% of all the moisture in the Southern Hemisphere was disrupted. So obviously agriculture would have been unbelievably affected, not only by 3 degrees Celsius, which is approximately 7.5, almost 8 degrees Fahrenheit, globally cooler for 160 years. But then all the precipitation changing and morphing is one thing. But what happens? Okay, so then it stabilizes after 160 years. So imagine those people. Okay, they went through a traumatic experience. It's third or fourth generation. So if you're thinking, 40 years per generation? And we're looking at 4 of those. So like third or fourth generation into it, they're like, finally, the weather pattern's stabilized. We're going to understand how to plant and harvest again. And a bit way more than 100 years. And then suddenly everything disrupts again. Because whatever the trigger was for the AMOC to freshen that water to allow glaciers to form in England turned off again. And then suddenly it started to rise and warming. And you see that giant, just as quickly as going into that 8.2K year event, straight out of it again. So what was the trigger for that? Straight out of that again. Because there wasn't anything back then to really cause CO2 warming. And these are the types of things I'm fascinated by. Take a look up there, and 160 years. So they were saying it was like a 100-year-long pulse of cold water that came in and disrupted everything. But what about the population of the planet? See, it was coming out of the Younger Dryas era, and it had been warming up since 12,000 years prior. So by the time you get to 8,000 years, they had 4,000 years of relatively stable climate to form a society, a civilization. I mean, they're telling us that we built the pyramids. If you want to go with the classical timeline, don't hold me to it. I'm just saying, the devil's advocate. You want to use the traditional timelines from the Mayans 3,600 years ago, or I'll even give you 4,000 years ago until today. And we went from pharaohs on obsidian rocks to pyramids to supercomputers in 4,000 years. Okay, well, from 12,000 years to 8,000 years prior, then what did they do with that 4,000 years of rising temperatures and ever increasing food production? You know, there's a huge missing piece of our history at that point. But that the main crux of it got wiped out. But from them, it never really gets very stable. You know, it's been up and down and up and down and up and down. So the stability of our climate is the thing that Look at the ups and downs on that chart. I mean, every time there's a drop in temperature, that's a civilization collapse. It usually happens over 100, 150 years. And we are definitely at another one right now, so you can see why. Powers that be, for a better term, that have been in control and doing this for 6,000 or 7,000 years, know the cycle's back again. We're at a disruption point, a restructuring point, a reset, whatever you like to call it, because of the natural mechanisms at work, but the elite are riding on top of this to get a greater outcome. Are we dropping back into an ice age? I am not sure, but when you look at the temperature chart across the last 10,000 years, we are definitely, even with what you consider maximum heating where we sit today, we would still be the fourth coldest, looking over the last, 10,000 years. Now, for me, that doesn't bode well, knowing that we're at the end, and we're actually in the longest interglacial in the last 3 million years, or actually 2.8 million years. This interglacial we're in now is the longest one. That's a long time, 2.8 million years, and this is the longest interglacial we've had between those 100,000 year spates of glacial activity. Our interglacial right now is approximately 1,000 years longer than the average. At least 1,000 years. Some say 2. The records, you're talking about millions and millions of years. So an extra 200 years on that way or this way, that's a rounding error. When you're talking about 2.8 million years, and then you want to, 200 years out of 2.8 million, that's like the fourth zero rounding error down. So when you start to look at these disruptions in humanity over time, I don't know. There's too many overlaps of ridiculous, planned, maniacal terraforming, shifting of humanity on purpose for it to be a coincidence. But then again, I'm holding a Bigfoot for President 2024 sticker, so maybe I'm the oddball out here. I'm not sure, Ransom.
Well, let me tell you how crazy you are with a little bit more, as we use this graph to compare to that point that you mentioned right there, 8,000, let's say, on the graph, it kind of looks like 8,300 to me. That would have been exactly the time. And you see that big heat and CO2 rise there. We don't know what anybody was doing really right there between 99.25 and about 8,300. But what I can tell you did happen about 5,400 BC, exactly right there, is the first city of Eridu, however you want to pronounce that. That's exactly when the Sumerian civilization began, according to archaeologists, that about 8,300 years ago. And at that time, they just popped up, right? They just popped up. They had running water, they had writing, they had schools, they had documents and contracts and beer and farming and all that. They already knew how to do it. They just pop up right there, fully formed. And I also want to point out that each one of those dips that you see are actually good periods of times for human being. If you go to that second dip right there, that would mark the beginning of the Bronze Age, wouldn't it? About 5,300 years ago. There's a dip right there, and then you have the Bronze Age. It warms up again. And so you can see that every single one of these ups or downs is the beginning and the end of some kind of empire or civilization. So who knows what was right before 8,300 years ago during that big warm period. We know we have places like, further back in time, like Göbekli Tepe, where they were erecting large stones. I'm more than positive, in my opinion, that the Great Pyramids go back to that time or before the Sumerians, because there's several indications that the Sumerians were talking about the Great Pyramids of Giza as already being there some 8,000 years ago. And then you roll forward, like I said, all the way up here to 5,000 years ago, that second dip. That is right where they start the Mayan calendar, or what's known as the Mayan calendar now. Actually was the Olmec calendar, right? But that civilization disappeared right before the transition there. And we don't know exactly who they were or what they were doing or any of that. A lot of conjecture. But this thing keeps going here, and then we get up to way up here by where we're at, and the whole last 1,000 years of advancement in human civilization has occurred in this little cold period right there. And you can go back. Each one of these dips right during was the beginning of some kind of complicated civilization that started agriculture on a large scale. And then something happens, it gets really hot, right? It goes back to normal. You don't hear much about them for a while. It's just like the Sumerians drop off the map for a little while also, and then pop back up as Mesopotamians, Babylonians, etc., like they taught you in school, never using the word.
And Hittites and Assyrians, right?
Right. And then so every single one of these dips, I'm sure that you could correlate to some kind of empire collapse or the beginning of a new era of empires, like I was referring to in South America, because we know, like I said, we know the Paracas people kind of rose to power. Tiwanaku culture also came to power. And we know the Tiwanaku culture built a whole city there made out of megalithic stones from someone else's civilization that was right up the hill. And we call that Gobekli Tepe, probably back there in the 9,000 to 8,000 range when it was constructed, in my opinion. And I wanted to talk to you about this last idea while we still have a couple of minutes. We talk a lot about the magnetic field changing, and I have this theory that at one point human beings on Earth, and this would be the time period, I think probably pre 8,000 years ago, probably back into the Younger Dryas era, where human beings didn't need writing, meaning that, everybody always wonders how they built places like Cusco and different stuff. There's no writing on any megalithic stones around the world, except for people that came along and wrote on the outside of it and tried to claim it as their own. And you could tell the technologies are totally different. But my point being, we always assumed that they had to have some kind of writing. Otherwise, how could you convey complex ideas like construction to someone? But I was thinking that maybe there was a time that we may be going into again. And that's why all of this rush to connect everyone to technology is that there was at some point a time where human being could just look at someone and convey an entire idea with no misunderstandings, no confusion or ideas left out because of limited writing styles. You would have a whole idea conveyed from one person to another person. And that may explain why all the complicated buildings on Earth, all of them, the oldest, the biggest, the most complicated, have no writing attached to it. What's your thoughts?
Well, I'm looking at the chart there and thinking, all right, so you have those dips that are very discernible, like 1156 AD. And then if we go back into before the birth of Christ, 4771 years prior. So I'm wondering, those people that were living in, like, say, 1156 AD, what were they hearing about the prior society and civilization that was discussed 4,700 years ago? Because that would have been a 3,000-year time difference between them. A little more even. So I'm wondering, what are the stories that were circulating around, just as we discussed today, about prior civilizations, looking at charts, hearing, reading, discussing with others who've already done an enormous amount of research on said things. I'm wondering, what were they told about coming into the Minoan warming period and the collapse of that some 3,100 years ago? And then the resubsistence and reemergence into a warm period, the Roman warming, and then the drop off of that, say 1,700 years ago. I mean, what are these stories told, and what did they know of the prior civilizations? Again, you could ask the same exact question at 4771 at the last drop off. What did they know about that culture that was 8,300 years ago?
David,
it does go deep, and you talk about the Chaldeans and that sort of thing, and the Hittites, and 6,000 years ago, the Chaldeans are through the Black Sea, and they have a huge amount of ruins, about 40 feet in water in the Mediterranean. That is also around 6,000 years prior. Black Sea sinks 40 feet underwater, and so those areas off of the very east coast of the Mediterranean, including Israel, there's a lot of underwater archaeology about 40 feet in depth around that area. Something changed.
I was going to ask you, what do you think about the weird coincidence that at each one of the peaks before the trough, something was given to humans like namely, if you go back to that 8,000 mark there, right before that is when cuneiform was implemented and given to people to use as a communication. And then when you go back up there to 477.1 at the bottom of the trough, you look back to the peak. At the peak was when the Olmec calendar was passed on to the Mayans, and they created that calendar. That's where, it starts there. How did they know that there was going to be a peak afterwards? It's almost like they knew exactly on this graph. Like if they were looking at the graph themselves and they thought, you know what, things are about to get tumultuous. We need to make something that keeps civilization going. And then we fast forward to our little bump up here, and it seems they're doing the exact opposite. They're about to hand us something, and it ain't going to be as useful as the precession of the equinox. It'll be something more like what we talked about, a completely integrated idiot system where you need an ID to enter into the Internet of Things.
Will I get the wind-up toy with that, or will I get the set of Legos? You will have no celestial knowledge. You will not know anything about solar cycles, civilization cycles. You would just play with your Legos, and you will get fed. If you delve into the texts, you will not be fed. Is that the way it's going to turn out? You read, you starve. Thanks for joining us tonight. David DuByne, Ransom Godwin, signing off. We'll be here next week. And sign up for our show notes. MIAC Conversations. Oilseedcrop.org.
Thank you for listening.
/MIAC.